You are listening to Personalization Outbreak, a podcast about the collapse of traditional corporate standards in today's more personalized world. I'm Glenn Llopis. I'm a leadership strategist, author, contributor to Forbes, and founder of the Leadership in the Age of Personalization movement. On this show, I'm interviewing executives across multiple sectors to find out how the balance between standardization and personalization can exist. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Earning Conviction series, part of the Personalization Outbreak podcast. I'm Glenn Llopis. Today, we're doing something special. We're bringing you a guest who's going to share something very personal, very honest, and extraordinarily authentic. Because one of the most important and yet most dangerous moments for your conviction is when the system around you changes. And today, we're going to be talking to someone who's lived through that exact thing. His name is Santi Strasser, dear friend of mine, whose career I've enjoyed following for years. And he could tell you a little bit more about how we met and how we got to where we're at today. And he goes by the brand, the Resilience Architect. See, he built an extraordinary brand inside of a Fortune 500 company. He led with purpose and trust and what he calls love over fear. And then what happened? Well, the system dissolved what he had built. And what happened next isn't just a story about a corporate culture. It's a masterclass in what happens when conviction meets bureaucracy. Now, before we get started, please click the like button below, share it with your colleagues, and subscribe to our YouTube channel and social media at Glenn Llopis. Santi, que honor, what an honor.
Glenn,
it's great to have you here, my friend.
thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm excited to share a little bit of my story. Now, before we get started, I want to tell you this. My story is not unique. I did share a post on Substack about a summary and the learnings of this story. And after that, I had so many people reach out to me with their own stories. So I'm doing this because I know there are many out there that are listening and they haven't shared their story. And I hope sometime they have the courage to do so.
Well, thank you for that, Santi. And there's no question that this conversation will get a lot of people talking more about the things that people don't have the courage to say. But we've reached a moment now where they must say it, not because they have to, because it's the right thing to do. So let me set the stage here, Santi. You weren't just part of a leader inside of a big company. You were building something from scratch, a startup inside of this large company. Multiple internal awards, retention bonuses, a brand that was outperforming everything else in that company. And it surprised many people just how well it went. So before we get into what went wrong, help us understand what went right. What did you build and what made it work?
Thank you, Glenn, for the question. Let's take a step back because I think the story starts with a leader in the company that recognized that the current structure did not create the kind of breakthrough innovation that the company needed for growth to show to the rest of the investors and everything. And so the company created what's called an internal venture studio for that, which was separated from the rest of the company in the way that we work. And so in 2022, I joined that internal venture studio and we built something new, fast, in a way that the rest of the company couldn't. And within less than 3 years, we validated an idea. We turned it into a purpose-driven brand that consumers loved. The executives at the company believed in the team behind it. And the organization recognizes that one of the strongest innovation. And so, Glenn, you may ask, how did we do that? What were like the components of this way of working? And I'll tell you that there were probably 4: autonomy, trust, speed, and purpose. We did have the freedom to operate very different from the rest of the organization. So we moved quickly. We tested before scaling. So we learned, we adjusted, and we made decisions with ownership. And you may say, was that chaos? And I would say it wasn't, because everything that we did was approved, visible, and we were accountable for those results. But I gotta say this, the operating rhythm was closer to a startup than the traditional hierarchy. And I would be dismissive or not tell you the truth if I wouldn't talk about team culture. It was critical for us. We had a flat structure with clear ownership on areas and a strong sense of personal commitments. So team members were not just completing tasks. They believe in what we were building together. We believe in what we were building together. So that had an emotional energy and allowed us to have personal accountability and agility at the same time. So if you ask me, like, what were the things? We had a clear mission, clear strategy, trust-based execution, and a team that felt emotionally invested in the kind of work and vision that we had for the brand.
I appreciate that setup, but then something happened in 2025. The company dissolved the venture studio and absorbed your brand into the traditional hierarchy. Overnight, everything changed. Take us inside that moment, Santi. What did it feel like when the system that celebrated you suddenly started evaluating you and others through a completely different lens?
That's right. So for me personally, Glenn, it was first a surprise and it was disoriented. In the Substack post that I wrote, I coined a phrase, the corporate ties shifted. So let me tell you what I believe it happened. This person that I thought he was brilliant in recognizing that their current organization couldn't create breakthrough innovation left the organization. And when he was replaced with a new leader, I don't know whether that was because sometimes new leaders have the tendency to sort of like, let me do it my way. And they're kind of like projecting themselves in growth professionally, or there was an actual worry about the performance of the program wasn't working. Whatever happened, I don't know. But when they dissolved the internal venture studio, they kept the brand that had the most potential. We were trying to create a brand in 5 years to 100 million in revenue, which we were on the path to. And so the behaviors that were celebrated was speed, ownership, initiative, creativity, and the ability of promise that we were going to do something and do it. All of that changed. And what were the lenses? Well, I think we went from being an entrepreneurial effort, creating value, real value in the marketplace, to become a threat to the bureaucracy. And personally, Glenn, it was emotionally hard because started to ask myself, like, am I wrong? Am I kind of like misunderstanding what we're here to do? Have the rule changed? And if so, how? Am I being am I being currently evaluated as either someone that leads on performance and outcomes, or I am being evaluated to how I fit in how things are done in this company? So, you know, the hardest part was for me that the people around me, the bureaucracy, I would argue, started to mirror a different thing that others had mirrored before. So I've been a builder. I was trusted by high-level leadership. We had momentum. And suddenly I was a threat and a potential liability for them by the way we were doing things. And it was a painful place to be, Glenn. But we have results to back up what we were doing.
Now, you said something, Santi, in your article, and the article on Substack is called The Corporate Grind. And you said something that really grabbed my attention. You said that the heart of the conflict wasn't about compliance, it was about culture, that your team ran on purpose and trust. The new system ran on process and control. And yet, those two things, they cannot coexist in the same space. So here's what I want to know.
Mhm.
At what point, Santi, did you realize that the very behaviors that made you successful were now being used as evidence against you?
Well, I gotta be honest, Glenn. I don't think I got that right away. I think the realization was kind of like things were slowly changing, and all of a sudden, I was a threat to the organization. Initially, I thought, Glenn, that it's a communication issue. Maybe I need to do a better job explaining why we work this way. Maybe I seem frustrated by all the changes. And so I try to reset those relationships and say, I'm committed to this collaboration. And I think at the end of the day, Glenn, like you said, these are two incompatible operating systems. And I wish it would have been a little different because this purpose-driven team was now in service of the bureaucracy, not the other way around.
Hmm.
And, as I said before, they were evaluating our behaviors differently. So, it became clear that this, we were losing the grip of what we were doing. So at the end of the day, Glenn, it wasn't about bad intentions. I mean, there are people that have some malice, but that was not, I don't think it came from unawareness and
So,
structural.
Santi, I want to have you explained a word that you've used a few times now. And you said they viewed you or they viewed the business that you and your team created as a threat. Explain what you mean by threat.
This is my opinion, Glenn, and I could be wrong about this, but what I mean by threat is sometimes the leadership in an organization has the best intentions for it. It's maybe providing clear structure, clear strategy, but somewhere in the middle of the organization, managers start grabbing power by trying to get more of the budget, and they lose the vision of why they exist. And the
Hmm.
thing that they're trying to accomplish is either survival, but without purpose, without a vision, without value creation or positioning. I'm trying to do this so I can position myself for my next role. I don't know exactly what it is, Glenn, but we were a threat to that because our team was focused on impact to the consumer. And I'm going to just maybe get ahead of the conversation, but let me tell you how I think we did it. The more you care for your team, the more they'll care for your consumer. So our actual impact in our consumer had to do with how we worked.
So Santi, I'm gonna like twist this discussion a bit because I could already imagine some of the senior leaders that are listening or watching this interview. Some might just say, hey, this had to do with budget cuts. Let's just throw it into the organizational hierarchy.
Mhm.
Let's, put it back into the mothership, and let's call it a day. But isn't there another story underneath this one? Because it wasn't just about dissolving venture studios. Wasn't, I mean, according to the article, The Corporate Grind, this almost felt like a personal attack in some respects, didn't it? I mean, is that part of this narrative?
It did felt to me like that, Glenn, but I want to just tell the audience that that could be a projection. In my experience, I was perceived in this space as a leader. And some individuals share this with me, so I can speak because I know that of them, that they would look at me to see how I reacted to these changes.
Hmm.
And that I learned from the CEO, to be honest. He said, you can lead from every seat. And I took that to heart and did it. But when you do have that kind of impact on other people versus authority, formal authority, I think that's a little bit of a personal threat.
So let's go into how this all connects to, and by the way, I want to make sure our audience knows that you, Santi, wrote the forward to my new book, Earning Conviction. And as I think about this discussion, this teeters on one topic around conviction versus compliance. So, because what you've described, this tension between who you are as a leader and what the system is demanding of you. See, that's the conviction versus compliance trap. Now, most leaders, when the system pushes back hard enough, they comply. They start performing the version of leadership the system wants them to see. Now, they abandon their convictions, not all at once, but slowly and quietly, one compromise at a time. Now, Santi, I want you to be honest with us, and this
Mhm.
might be a question you might want to pass on.
No.
But did you ever consider just going along with it at some point? I mean, if the brand and the business mattered that much to you,
Mhm.
wouldn't it just been better to just go along with it?
I'm going to admit, Glenn, I don't think this is comfortable for me, but I almost gave in. Let me maybe say a few things about this. I did start questioning myself and I asked, should I be kind of like quieter in this organization? Should I be less challenging? Because I know I'm a little bit disagreeable. Like when I have passion, I could come off as very challenging or unwilling to change, which is definitely not my thing. Should I perform the version that is expected of me in terms of leadership or just disengage, right? That's not who I am, Glenn. And so I think sometimes when companies start becoming challenged by the environment in which they are in, leaders start unconsciously behaving from fear. And in the organization, as you go through the levels of hierarchy, that's compounds and is felt more, more, and more. So that's a little bit of my story. Now, I gotta tell you that something saved me. What stopped me from actually feeling that was who I was as an individual. When you have the conviction of who you are and you're being asked to do things that collide with who you are, that conviction and who I am is what pushed back. But Glenn, I almost gave in.
When did you? Well, let's put it this way. Um, that was a defining moment, and obviously there were consequences. Was it worth it?
It was totally worth it. And Glenn, you may ask myself, for example, would I have done things differently? But let me tell you this. I believe that decisions need to be judged with the information that was available at the time, as well as my ability or your ability to make that decision. So if you ask me in this balance of giving in and pushing back, was that the right decision? I would say with the information available that I had and my ability, it was. But it led me a big learning, okay? But that learning is worth the experience. I am a better and stronger leader with more conviction in who I am today.
Now, you wrote something in the Corporate Grind article on Substack that I want every leader listening to hear right now. You said the following, and I quote, by the time the situation escalated, I was exhausted from defending the principles that had once been celebrated. See, that sentence right there, that's the exhaustion this entire Earning Conviction series is about. It's not burnout from overwork. It's the exhaustion from fighting for who you are inside a system that no longer wants you to be that person. So, how did that exhaustion show up for you, Santi? Not just mentally, but physically.
Well, this is part of the core of the story, but I'll tell you how it showed up for me. Mentally, it was all of a sudden kind of like the rug was taken out of me. And so I felt very vigilant. I would argue that even a little bit paranoid. I couldn't stop thinking about the conversations that I had, trying to put details together into a story of people are trying to get me out. And that kind of overthinking in the mind becomes consuming.
Mm.
And if you match that with my physical aspect, I stopped sleeping, I became agitated, and I found myself sometimes with an inability to calm down, like stop. I remember
Mm.
over the weekend where all of this suddenly changed. I went to two Orange Theory classes, and I know, Glenn, you do F45, but think about like F45 classes, and I could have done a third one because I
Ooh.
couldn't even feel it. So my my brain couldn't stop, but my body was disconnected from that. So I couldn't even feel that exhaustion. And like you said, it was an exhaustion from defending the principles that in the same organization had been once celebrated. Let me just mention one more thing. My wife told me, Santi, you haven't taken a sick day in 4 years.
Ooh.
And I maybe should have taken that, Glenn, as a signal.
So then it happened. The kitchen floor. 3 nights of almost no sleep, your body shaking, your thoughts fractured, your willpower gone. 2 hours before you can stand up. Most leaders will never talk about a moment like this publicly, Santi. You chose to. Why? And what do you want other leaders to understand about what that moment actually represents?
Yeah, it's very simple, Glenn, and I sort of said it at the beginning. This thing that happened to me happens a lot for individuals, but they keep it that silently or happens in private, and many don't share it. For me, it's about being who I am. And when I share that story, Glenn, it feels like freedom. It feels like weight has gone out of my like back. And to be honest, I'm an authentic leader. So that is somewhat authentic in action. It's transparent. And I've always led with vulnerability, Glenn. And so to be honest, sharing that story is just who I am. And there's strength in sort of like telling the truth of what pressure can do to anyone. It's not just me. A lot of individuals reach out after I did that post and that article. So this is as much of a warning signal to others as it is a reminder for me, Glenn. You
Hmm.
know, my body told me the truth before I was ready to accept it.
Wow. Well, that's very telling and something that I think a lot of people ignore because they just think it'll go away when all it is, it's a very important signal that it's time to act and do something about it. But Santi, let's step back. Um, this was, and again, you shared this with me offline that this was a very painful moment for you, for someone who has been told to do what's right, to speak your truth, to be authentic. Is it worth it?
Yes, it is, Glenn. Um, the kind of feedback that I got from my team when they noticed that I wasn't having a great time was, Santi, please don't leave us.
Hmm.
It's the impact you have on other people that really matters to me. Glenn, I think I shared with you my life purpose before, which is to make others feel like the world is a playground. And that playground has two components: safety and openness to play. Safety because there is psychological safety in the team, and openness because how we do things can evolve over time. And that's who I am, Glenn. I think that's what sort of like centers me.
Now, Santi, I'm inspired by that,
Thank you.
but someone listening might be saying, come on, Santi, I hear you, but they don't pay the bills. You've got financial responsibilities. I mean, you have personal obligations. I mean, you could have just played it safe, Santi. Again, yes, the impact matters, but there's a cost for that. Why did that cost not get in the way of your decisions?
Well, Glenn, I'm gonna be completely transparent. I have organized my life not to have maybe dependents. So I totally understand when people have mortgages and families that they want to support, and they may stay in those environments too long for them. I didn't have any of those two things. I also had really good savings. So that it's a place where you can fall. So this idea of just complying for the sake of supporting the structures or the responsibilities that you give into is something that I chose not to put that weight on me.
It's almost as if you knew yourself so well that you planned that this day would eventually happen in your career. I don't know. Did you ever think about that?
I rather like to think about life as happening for me, as here are the learnings for me. I don't know if I planned that, Glenn, but maybe unconsciously I did.
Maybe you knew yourself well enough to know that things weren't going to get in your way if they didn't align with your own beliefs and the things that you value the most. Now, let's shift to the recovery, right? Recovery gave you perspective that you didn't have before. And I think
Yes.
that's one of the most important things that we talk about on this Earning Conviction series. Because exhaustion, as you know, real exhaustion has a way of stripping everything down to what actually matters. And you can't perform your way through it. You can't strategize your way out of it. You have to face it, just like you did. So, what did you see clearly for the first time on the other side of that breakdown? What became more clear to you?
Very good question. So I talked about my life purpose, and I had connected my life purpose to what we were doing as a team. And I know, Glenn, that purpose is a powerful force. But what I didn't know back then is that my body had limits and everyone's body had limits. And your career, you may perceive it more as a marathon. And I was acting on it's a never-ending sprint. And
Hmm.
our bodies, and you know this as in F45, they have lactic acids, which is what the muscles, when they muscle, require oxygen. And so let's
Mhm.
think of purpose as fire. Fire also requires oxygen. And this is
Hmm.
something I learned with my transcendental meditation training, which is slowing down or resting is the other side of activity. And that's someone I didn't know. So activity should be balanced with rest. And so I learned that. So I can tell you this, I became clear about what leadership requires of me. And it's not just courage, it's discernment, it's
Hmm.
seeing. And that is wisdom, Glenn. I did not know that before. And that's why I say I wouldn't have changed what I did because I learned that today. And so you
Well,
need,
I'm sorry to interrupt,
yeah,
Santi. Explain what you just said in something tangible. Put that to practice. What do you mean by that?
thank you. When you notice that the organization doesn't welcome that part of you that is unique to who you are, where there is so much pressure to do things that you may perceive as not right, that's the moment where you need to understand whether you're going to fight it, when you're going to adapt it, when you're going to protect people. I mean, my team, I love my team. I thought they needed to be protected.
Hmm.
And when are you going to protect yourself? I gotta tell you this, Glenn. My body was telling me to quit before I was ready to do it. And so that's what it seems. If you're in a company or an organization that doesn't celebrate who you are, who you truly are, Glenn, and this maybe it's a little spiritual, who you are beyond your identity, of course, your identity also. But that's the moment to quit, my opinion.
You know, Santi, this reminds me of some of the studies that are coming out now that talk a lot about job hugging. I don't know if you've heard that term,
I
but
have not.
what it means is that people are holding on to their jobs or hugging them, meaning that they're not letting go of them until they've done what they think they need to do to let go and move on. In other words, people are holding on tight to their jobs, not wanting to be there, but they want to be there long enough to get paid so that when they're ready, they leave. Do you feel like you did a little bit of job hugging?
I am not sure, Glenn. Let me just tell you honestly what I did. I did look outside to see if I could creatively come up with a solution for a company in Mexico bringing their products in the US. That didn't pan out. I tried to apply for one job only that I really, really wanted. I didn't get it. So I'm not sure I hold really tight. The opportunities didn't like show up for me at the time because probably what I needed to learn was to go back to my body. So,
Hmm.
Glenn, I think that I tried to leave, but what I did wrong was not to listen to my body when he was telling me, quit without another job because it's not worth it.
You said, you wrote in the article, systems without empathy can break people, not through malice, but through lack of self-awareness. And I think that's a critically important distinction, Santi, because it lets organizations off the hook, and at the same time, it holds them accountable. They're not evil. They're just not paying attention to the human cost of what they're actually building. So, what do you think needs to change in organizations to actually recognize that cost before it's too late?
It's a great question, Glenn. And I would say I would start with first, do they want to do something about it? So if an organization wants different results for what they are currently getting, and we know the definition of insanity, organizations need to treat people as just an execution capacity. And they do start need to see them as fully human. And don't get me wrong, I'm not like daydreaming that we're not all replaceable for an organization. But there is a difference in knowing that individuals, you can find individuals to do work versus treating them like they're just a number. And so, like you said, I don't think most of the damage is done by people in malice, although I do want to say there may be a few out there. It is an awareness, and it happens because the systems are designed around control, uncertainty avoidance, and risk management. So there is not enough of thought given to that, if you will, um, how humans are, both sides of the analytical part, the emotional part. And maybe there's a little bit, there may be empathy. Like we understand what our employees are going through, but is there enough care? And Rob Craven, who you interview, Glenn, he says, as the leader go, so goes the business. And many
Hmm.
times when leaders feel pressure, they actually unconsciously pass that fear to the entire organization. And when you talk to the edges of the organization or the bottoms of the layers, if you will, they can tell you that fear feels really heavy. So it's not even the fear that the leader fears, it's the fear that compounds throughout the organization. So, Glenn, you may ask, okay, so as a person, as a leader inside of a company, as an entrepreneur today, what do companies need to do? And one of them is just listening. I can tell you that friends, work friends, have told me that when they don't listen deeply, this is not just a survey, this is different. And they go to an all company meeting. Those narratives that they share are perceived as tone deaf. So this is a real issue because this is the people that are executing your strategy. The second thing that I think it's interesting to consider, at least, is to have, do you have managers of people that are trained to recognize this signal? And I can tell you that performance is just a lagging indicator. This problem starts way before. And one of the early signals that you can pay attention is silence. When people stop telling you, or stop challenging you, or stop answering the questions when you ask. And the third one, Glenn, I mean, this is what I preach all the time, which is psychological safety has to be protected the same way that financial performance is, proprietary processes is, intellectual property is. If you want an organization that adapts, problem solves in the uncertainty of an environment, I believe that empathy is not good enough. You have to move from empathy to care for your individuals. And Glenn, I won't tell you, like generations are changing and they are demanding this.
Well, I'll double click on this word care and I'll relate it back to healthcare. And it's clear that if organizations, and I know that there's work being done, not just in their benefit plans, but in the understanding that, the healthcare industry right now is really at a breaking point. And as personalized medicine becomes more of a need, given the differences in people today more than ever before, that same level of attention in the healthcare industry needs to coexist with inside of organizations. Look, when things are predictable and efficiency becomes your best friend when they are predictable, that's a great environment to be a part of. But when you're chasing something that you don't really know how to chase because the market's changed, people have changed, technology's changing, there's no playbook. And so as you're trying to create one while remaining competitive or even in survival mode, the pressure put on people and the cost of absorbing that level of pressure, it's just not sustainable. And it's not that certain people can handle it and others can't. It's that eventually this catches up to people. I share this because what you did, you probably saved your life, Santi. Why do I say that? Because if you would have kept going, gotten off the floor, went back for another round, two, three, four, five, who knows what would have happened to you? And this is why I actually believe that we are in one of the most vulnerable states in modern history as it relates to healthcare. Because the very environments, whether it's today's chaotic society and or how we or what's expected of us in a workplace environment, the environment right now is not the individual's friend. It's unknowingly become their foe. Why? Because everyone's trying to reinvent, trying to figure out what's next at an enormous pace with so much pressure that the human body just wasn't designed for. So I share this with you because, Santi, there's a lot of people who would have just caved in. And you know what? They may still have their job, make good money, but at their own personal cost. And it's the cost of their care. And that's something that you can't get back unless you get out in front of it before circumstances force their hand. And I actually think that we're headed to, we're not headed, we are currently living in the most vulnerable chronic disease state in modern history. More people are getting cancer, heart disease, mental health. The list goes on, and yet our healthcare systems aren't even prepared for it. So, thanks for letting me pause and really address this because these are systemic issues that impact everybody. I'm sure you weren't thinking about the healthcare industry, but you contributed to it. Why? Because you're an example of someone who chose their life over what if some over something that could have been much, much worse. And this is how people that tried to lead by example need to start exploring a little differently now. Because yes, there's a price to pay financially. There's a price to pay mentally. We go through the entire list. But I actually think you saved your life. Has that ever crossed your mind, Santi?
Oh, 100%, Glenn. Look, I'm not a doctor, but I'm just going to mention a word that is called epigenetics. We all have different, maybe weaknesses or tendencies. And once those tendencies are actually executed in your body, it's easy to reel them back. It's actually, sorry, it's hard to reel them back, actually. So it's a big warning because once you take a path of any of the sickness or the issues that you mentioned, Glenn, it's much harder to reel them back.
How did this affect your family,
It's a
Santi?
great question. Glenn, one thing I can tell you is that my wife supported me through all the recovery time. I mean, just imagine I was on the floor for 2 hours. Poor her, she didn't know what to do. I would also tell you that in my recovery process, which I don't think it just took 2 hours, it may have taken a long time. It put strain in the relationship between my family and my wife. So I'm gonna be honest, Glenn. I mean, This this had a personal cost.
How'd you work through it?
The people in my life worked through it.
And what did you learn about your family?
Is that we are stronger today for having conversations we couldn't have before.
Powerful. Do you mind sharing just a couple highlighted like topics of the things that you're able to have discussions around now that you couldn't before?
Yeah, there are some questions about that as a child you may have about your upbringing. Those are
Mm,
questions that I can ask my parents today without any fear that I'm going to be hurting their feelings.
hmm
We are
hmm
all in an evolution. And so
hmm
I know that who my parents were where I was growing up is not who they are today, but I still may want to understand some things and why some things happen. Other things could be what's happening today. Look, I don't agree with, I don't know, the way you're spending money, or I can talk to my brother about how he's raising a child, just concerns that those were conversations we didn't have before. Glenn, I have a big influence in my family from Germans and the Netherlands. So that has a little more stoic families, which is very loving, but I'd rather not rock the boat with those conversations. So it's an evolution for my family, and I'm super glad about it.
Thank you for sharing that, Santi. Your wisdom is shining brightly on people that probably didn't even know how to talk about things like this. So thank you. Now, Santi, in the article, you introduced the idea of purpose needs pace. And I think it's one of the most powerful things I've heard a leader articulate. And you described it like fire, the spark, the fuel, the oxygen, the heat. And what happens when you pour too much fuel on a fire without oxygen? What is it?
The fire stops existing.
That's what happened to you.
That's right.
Not enough oxygen, the
Mm-mm.
emotional bandwidth
Mm-hmm.
to sustain it in a hostile environment. For leaders listening right now who are feeling like they're running on fumes, what's the first thing they need to do to restore that oxygen?
Well, I gotta tell you this, Glenn. I am performance driven, and many of my friends are too. And so sometimes we think we need more efforts, more hours on the job. But the first practical step that I would tell them is to pause long enough that you tell yourself the truth about where you are now. Not how you portray yourself as a leader, but the real version. So honesty with yourself. And some of the questions that I can come up with, they're very simple, but am I still leading from clarity or just reacting from fear? Am I energized by the mission that I'm carrying through, or I am just surviving with adrenaline and cortisol? Am I protecting my purpose, or I am just burning myself to prove it? So that analogy of the fire I really like. But to me, oxygen means, or may mean, slowing down, asking for help, creating boundaries, and stepping away from unhealthy conflict doesn't build anything. Or naming for yourself what's no longer sustainable. But it does begin with honesty. And so I like to think that commitment to an organization, commitment to a cause, it if you put purpose without pace, it can be self-destructive. And you don't want to confuse commitment for that.
Santi, here's the question at the heart of this entire conversation. You had a choice: conform, comply, survive, or hold your ground, stand by your convictions, and take whatever came with that. And here's what I want our listeners to understand: earning conviction isn't about winning, it's about not losing yourself. So, Santi, looking back now, do you believe that you made the right choice? And what would you say to the leader right now who is facing the exact same crossroads?
That's a great question, Glenn. I believe I made the right choice based on the information that I had available and the capability to take that decision. Do you mind repeating the second question, Glenn?
Sure, sure. There's people listening right now who are dealing with the same
Mhm.
crossroads. What would you say to them right now?
Yeah, they are not alone. And this is very real. I said it before, Glenn, but when I wrote this article and shared my story, many people reached out with their own stories. So that is something that you shouldn't feel like you're only you going through this. It may be more than just you. So, you know, have I made the right choice? It was the right choice for me. I protected who I was, Glenn. I gave in a little bit, but I came back strong. And I think honestly about yourself and seeing the signals, whether that is the external signals or your internal signals as your body. Earning
Now,
conviction over time is not about winning every single battle. It's about remaining whole enough as an individual to lead from an integrated self.
very well put. Now, you said you made the right choice for you.
Mhm.
How can you guide somebody that is at this crossroads right now? They have to make a choice. What kind of guidance would you give them?
Well, I can not probably guide everyone in their specific circumstances, but I can share the biggest learning of this experience, which for me was to listen to my body when it was telling me to quit. And so, you know, if you, that's what I would say, Glenn. And watch out for the red flags in your environment. I learned that my conviction was not the problem. My mistake was believing I could keep explaining it to the system over and over when the system was not listening and not listening to my body when it was exhausting to doing so. That experience happened for me, Glenn. And now I know better, but I didn't know that before.
Wow. Such a paradox. You identified what I think is one of the most important ones in modern organizational life, that the very systems built to minimize risk often end up creating the conditions for human burnout, which in turn leads to risk. I mean, I want everybody to think about that for a moment. Do we really think that the risk is just business related or human related? It goes back to what I've always asked everybody. When you go through transformation, where do you start? With the environment, the individual, or both? And unequivocally, it's both. But where does that journey begin? With the individual, so that they know who they are and how they can best contribute, and they understand the value that they unequivocally bring so that they have the confidence to navigate these environments that were not designed for the individual. They were designed for outcomes, output, and productivity. So as we wrap this up, Santi, this is the question I've been waiting to ask you. You've been through the collapse, you've done the recovery, and you've gained the perspective, and now you're back. You said it yourself. I've returned to health, and I'm no longer the same leader I was before. That's what we call unshakable, not untouchable, unshakable, not immune to pain or pressure. But now you're rooted, you're clear, you're conviction driven. Tell me, Santi, what does that feel like?
Well, that's a great question, Glenn. Look, I'm gonna share. This is very personal for me, but in my body, it feels calmer. Particularly, there's less tension on my neck and in my upper back. And as a person, I move slower, I talk slower, and I feel more centered and balanced after this experience. I'm the resilience architect, but I no longer believe that resilience is the ability to absorb unlimited pressure, Glenn. there is a breaking point. And I believe now that resilience is the wisdom to know where that pressure is worth carrying, depending on your environment.
This is the Earning Conviction series, the practice that redirects leaders from exhausted to unshakable. And that's what Santi did. He moved from being exhausted by a system that rejected everything he stood for to understanding that his conviction was never the problem. The system was, and that clarity, that unshakable understanding of who you are and what you stand for, that's what gets you through. Santi, thank you for your courage, for your time, for your honesty, and for sharing this conversation with so many people.
Thank you for having me, Glenn. And as you know, I am the resilience architect, building relationships one at a time. So if anyone would like to reach and talk a little bit deeper about it or just talk about their own experience, I'm always open to that.
Well, and they could find you on LinkedIn.
That's right.
So now, if this episode moved you, like it moved me, share it with one of your friends. How about sharing it with your leader, someone in your life that you think needs to hear it? And if you haven't already subscribed to the Personalization Outbreak podcast, please do, wherever you listen to your podcast. And remember, when you earn conviction, you will see things that others don't, do what others won't, and keep pushing when prudence says quit. Thank you, Santi. I greatly appreciate you and your time today.
Thank you, Glenn.
Thanks for listening to Personalization Outbreak. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss a show. If you enjoyed the content, visit ageofpersonalization.com to check out our free streaming video series and learn how to get involved in the movement. I'm Glenn Llopis. I wish you a good day, and remember, without strategy, change is merely substitution, not evolution.